Chapter 1, Should There Be Another Life, We Will Dance Under the Heavens. You are listening at FameTV.info. Should there be another life, we will dance under the heavens, the 9 heavens. Amongst a sea of clouds. The wind and thunder platform. A single piece of sky, here, was the continent of the 9 heavens. The 3 higher heavens. An extremely perilous area, the wind and thunder platform. Whilst on it, one could reach for the winds and thunder, and its only exit was the single piece of sky. However, at that moment, there was instead nothing but foul wind and a fog of misery on the wind and thunder platform. Xuanhuan, hand over the 9 tribulations sword. We will spare you from death. Xuanhuan, you are already on the verge of death, just hand over the 9 tribulations sword. The others and I can leave you a complete corpse. Xuanhuan, the 9 tribulations sword, such a godly item that is ranked first under the heavens, is completely wasted in your hands. How many years has it been that you have shown no improvement? That heavenly item is absolutely wasted on you. Just hand it over. Shouts of clamoring voices came from all directions. At the center of the wind and thunder platform was a slightly protruding piece of large rock. On that rock, Xuanhuan was wearing a black piece of shirt. His entire body was bathed in blood, and his hair loosely disheveled. However, his face appeared unconcerned, and his eyes remained cool and collected like a piece of rock. His body, upright and straight like a spear, similar to the sword within his hand, he was filled with an unyielding intent. Even though he was already mortally wounded. Beneath his feet, within a radius of several hundred zhang, there were countless limbs and body pieces that were dripping with blood. That he looked at the surrounding group of experts who were only shouting, but were not rushing over. Xuanhuan's face revealed the hint of a cynical smile, filled with arrogance and disdain, faced against that sea of experts. Even though he was completely surrounded with no means of escape, his haughtiness still continued to soar. Those people were all aware of the situation. They knew that he was already on his last legs, but none dared to approach. When faced against an attack that would cause them both to perish together, no one was willing to become that scapegoat. They could only hope that someone who sought death would blindly charge in, but no one was stupid enough to do so. That was why, at that moment, they had unanimously stopped their advance and stayed their hands. That kind of people, with that kind of mentality, even if their levels of martial cultivation were higher, even if their numbers were to increase, even if they could kill me 10,000 times, they were also not worthy of being my enemies. Xuanhuan continued to smile cynically, then slowly began to sit down. The expression on his face remained indifferent, and his lips continued to remain silent. However, instead, his mind was filled with doubt. How did the matter regarding the 9 tribulations sword being in his possession got disclosed out? That he had clearly investigated for a total of 3 years before ascertaining that there was a fragment which belonged to the 9th tribulation sword within the wind and thunder platform at the 3 higher heavens. After spending untold hardships, he had finally found a chance and risked a gamble that had a 1 in 10 chance of survival to arrive at the 3 higher heavens. However, why did he encounter such a massive ambush after his arrival there? On that day, it was only the 5th day since he had entered the 3 higher heavens. Moreover, he encountered that ambush at the moment when he had just found the wind and thunder platform. On that day, the only result would be the result of his death. He was all along famous for his secretive whereabouts, so who knew his plans? He had continuously charged forward for more than 10 times, but he was blocked and pushed back every single time. Meanwhile, all of the places that he had chosen became dead ends. According to common sense, there was absolutely no reason for him to be unable to charge a path out. Who was the person who understood his habits to such a degree? Who was that secret enemy? That question had already puzzled Xuanhuan for a long time. The blade of the 9 tribulations sword flashed and reflected the sun's rays from the sky above, painting a rainbow in the middle of the air. Everyone who witnessed that scene felt their desires burning, and could not wait to have that godly item in their grasp. Higher ancient godly item. A godly item that was ranked first on the continent of the 9 heavens. Whoever obtained the 9 tribulations sword would be invincible under the heavens. That being invincible under the heavens was the huge secret within the 9 tribulations sword. According to legends, the power of the 9 tribulations sword was not only limited to that 9 tribulations of the 9 heavens, a single sword to destroy the world, to reign supreme for 1,000 autumns until eternity, exceeding the heavens beyond the 9 heavens. That was the only sentence of the ballad passed down throughout the world regarding the 9 tribulations sword. Its origins could no longer be traced. The 9 tribulations sword had always been only a legend. No one expected that the 9 tribulations sword would one day actually appear right before them. Xuanhuan also had a doubt. The 9 tribulations sword. Correct, he had obtained the 9 tribulations sword. Moreover, step by step, he had found 5 fragments of the sword. However, to his disappointment, he had also discovered that the power of the 9 tribulations sword was also not as great as he had imagined. Furthermore, there was always a clear gap between the 9 tribulations sword and him. No matter if he had poured fresh blood over it, or how much he attempted to perceive it through sincerity, there was not even the slightest effect. Why was that so? Why? Why his utmost emotions, the pinnacle sword? He had destroyed his emotions and immersed in the sword, then from the way of the sword immersed in the way of martial arts, and from the way of martial arts sought the way of the heavens. The price he paid was a life of loneliness, and he led a life filled with killing as his believed way of life. Unfortunately, in the end, he still did not manage to master the 9 tribulations sword, and therefore did not manage to master the art of the 9 heavens. Was the choice he made wrong? Or was that path definitely a mistake? Or could it be said that his lack of emotions was still insufficient to satisfy the 9 tribulations sword? Emotionless swordsman, if a swordsman had emotions, how could he still be considered a swordsman? The way of the sword, the way of martial arts, the way of the heavens, they all lacked emotions in the end. However, why were his emotions wavering at the current moment between life and death? 9 tribulations sword, 9 tribulations sword, what exactly is your secret? Looking at the surrounding stares of greediness towards the 9 tribulations sword, Xuanhuan secretly gave a bitter laugh. All of you only knew that obtaining this 9 tribulations sword would make you invincible under the heavens, but do all of you know how much have I sacrificed for this 9 tribulations sword? That I have already nothing left. The red and graceful figure of a person seemed to flash within his mind, and it became clearer and clearer. Slowly, a pair of red sleeves were raised lightly and swayed. From somewhere, a fleeting music seemed to begin playing, while that lithe and graceful figure slowly began to dance amidst the dreamlike surroundings. The focus in Xuanhuan's eyes suddenly became distant with a sense of loss, filled with sorrow. Fresh blood flowed, and Xuanhuan clearly felt his own life quickly slipping away. He had pursued martial arts all his life. Going into a relationship, breaking a relationship, getting out of a relationship, as well as destroying his emotions after becoming emotionless. At that very moment, on the verge of his death, he had originally thought that his only regret should be that he did not achieve the martial domain level of supremacy that he pursued all his life, while he was alive. However, what he had never thought was, at that moment, that very point of time, a figure he originally thought that he had long since forgotten, had instead actually appeared within his mind's consciousness. That beautiful figure clad in luxurious and fluttering red clothes, that turning to look back, the curl of that body. Those were all excellent expressions. Lightly, nimbly, and gracefully, his mind began to sing and dance. Every single time the figure turned back to look at him, that gaze carried with it passion that was as deep as the Seamo Qingwu, the woman who had caused Xuanhuan to enter into a relationship, as well as breaking that relationship. So, I never did really break that relationship, Xuanhuan muttered to himself. The edges of his mouth revealed the hint of a self-deprecating smile in his mind. A hint of remorse quietly began to diffuse. Like smoke, it immediately engulfed his entire soul. At that very moment, he could no longer control his mind, nor did he also want to control it. Qingwu. If I were to head to the netherworld now, would it be possible to meet up with you, Qingwu? Did you know, when I had initially practiced the 3 tribulations of emotional destruction / to leave you, how much had I regretted that? Xuanhuan's mind was filled with a sour sense of loss. Everybody attacked together. Completely chop him up. As for the 9 tribulations sword, it will not be too late for us to slowly negotiate later. One man gave a loud shout. Otherwise, if he is given time to recover, it will become our turn to suffer a huge loss. From the surroundings, the large crowd of people gave loud shouts of agreement, then immediately raised their swords and sabers as one, and moved towards Chu Yang. While surrounding him, Chu Yang remained sitting in a trance, unmoving. The gaze of his eyes seemed to be looking at somewhere else ahead of him. As if filled with a deep sense of bleakness that had remained unchanged since ancient times, the strands of hair that were stained with blood floated before his forehead. The dance of that person within his mind's consciousness became even more intense, and had already become a group of red shadows, indefinitely fleeting, but were instead weaving a boundless sky of red silk. At the same time, a graceful and dreary voice slowly began singing from amidst the red shadows. A lifetime is not a gentle dance, a dance is a lifetime of bitterness. I will dance for you in this lifetime, bitter or not I will dance a lifetime. That was her pledge of love, a little poem that Mo Qingwu had created. He could still remember that moment when Mo Qingwu had tears in her eyes, her gaze filled with melancholy and resentment. She had long knew that he had made use of her emotions to practice his martial skills. However, like moths drawn to a flame, she had instead thrown herself into his arms, and had allowed him to burn as he pleased. That girl of pure heart and spirit. As Chu Yang wistfully thought of her, his heart could not help but feel sour. At the very end of his life, did he only know the preciousness of true feelings. But for himself, he could no longer turn back. He could still remember that final time when Mo Qingwu was rejected by him. With a wounded heart and broken spirit, in a distracted state of restlessness, there was an attack on her way back home, and the young woman of peerless beauty finally passed away like a diminishing fragrance. When he received the news and had immediately rushed over, he was still a single step too late at the very end. Although he had later killed the entire family of the people who had harmed Mo Qingwu, not sparing even the 9 generations of that clan's chickens and dogs, the beautiful girl could not come back to life. At the moment before her death, that woman of peerless beauty had gently laid in his arms. She had said to him, Chu Yang, should there be another life? Should I meet you once more, I hope that you will carefully take a look at me. I look nicer than a sword. Chu Yang, to be able to die in your arms, I am very satisfied. Those were the last words of Mo Qingwu. Qingwu, you were not satisfied. You had regrets. Otherwise, why would you have tears at the corners of your eyes? On the face of the beautiful girl who had already taken her last breath, 2 clear droplets of tears suddenly dropped. She had forcibly pretended to put on a smile on her deathbed, afraid that he would be hurt. That was how wretched. 2 droplets of clear tears had instead at that very moment smashed and shattered his heart. From then on, his heart would be covered in dust, drifting lightly like a dream. Demons danced in a sea of blood and on a mountain of bones. A gentleman does not question the warring swords within 1,000 li, together forever through life and death unto the highest heaven. That was a poem specially created by Xuanhuan, the gifted scholar who was then ranked first under the heavens, in response to the deep feelings Mo Qingwu had for Chu Yang, while at the moment, Qingwu, you have already arrived at the highest heaven, yet I instead remain in the mortal realm. But, I am soon able to be with you together forever through life and death. Through generations after generations, Chu Yang was lost in his thoughts, and the usually cold and hardened edges of his lips displayed the hint of a warm and gentle, tragic smile. The hair that was stained with blood began to float amongst the wind. Qingwu, wait for me, Qingwu, did you know, should there be another life, I'd rather not practice whatever way of the sword, rather not want to be at whatever pinnacle, rather not have revenge, and would rather be with you. In this world, was there anything worth that satisfied smile of yours? No, the graceful dance and songs within his mind's consciousness became increasingly distant, and Mo Qingwu's voice seemed to also become increasingly fleeting. I will dance for you in this lifetime. I will dance for you through the generations. Even if my heart is bent 1,000 times, it will never change. Even if I were to die 10,000 times, I will not feel bitter. Not feel bitter, Schwa a golden blade cut through the wind and came towards him from the front. Whilst still in a trance, Chu Yang casually blocked with his sword. His mind was still listening to Mo Qin Wu's voice from somewhere. This life is already ending. Ah, Qin Wu, before my death, let me hear more of your voice, not bitter. Qin Wu, you were bitter, but instead did not feel bitter. At this moment, I am very bitter. Filled with regret, the number of sabers and swords added to the bodies became more and more, fresh blood flew little by little, and bit by bit, pain began to focus on the various parts of his entire body. Finally, the songs and dance within the mind's consciousness had been broken. Chu Yang furiously gave a long shout. He suddenly stood up, his long, black-colored hair rose and flew about intensely. His hair band broke. He began to rage hysterically. Even at the final moments of my life, all of you came to interrupt our reunion. You all deserve to die. Peng a sword pierced through Chu Yang's chest. Chu Yang felt a momentary pain, and lowered his head to take a look. The piece of jade pendant that hung around his neck shattered before his eyes. At the center of the jade pendant, a single Wu character quietly began to break into pieces. Chu Yang blankly reached out a hand to touch, his hand grabbing fragments. All of a sudden, he became extremely furious. That was the only keepsake Qin Wu had left for him, kill. Chu Yang suddenly rose his head, the intent to kill wildly surged within his eyes. With a crazed shout, the 9 tribulations sword within his hand suddenly waved, giving off 10,000 rays of light. It was as if lightning from the 9 heavens had suddenly chained to form a waist band of light. Peng the sounds momentarily rang out, and all the weapons that were surrounding near him had a length neatly cut off. Everyone hurriedly retreated back and frightfully looked at the tidy circle of weapons that were cut into half beneath Chu Yang's feet. Cold sweat oozed and dripped down their backs. They had never thought that the power of a single attack from the 9 tribulations sword would actually be that horrifying. They had originally thought that Chu Yang was already close to death, convinced that it was exactly the moment to be daring. Every single person was secretly planning, that after Chu Yang's death, how should they handle the 9 tribulations sword? How would they seize it? If it had fallen into their own hands, how would they escape? Just as every single person was urgently contemplating countermeasures, Chu Yang had instead suddenly raised his sword. Moreover, its power had been that great, that was greatly beyond their expectations. Chu Yang's body was bathed in blood, and he was wielding his sword while standing upright. His eyes watched the group of people before him with a gaze as cold as ice, looking over them one by one. No matter whose face his gaze rested on, that person's entire body would uncontrollably tremble momentarily. Within those pair of eyes, they only felt endless grief, endless despair, endless rage, and endless killing intent. After Chu Yang had looked an entire round, he suddenly questioned in a soft voice, "All of you want the 9 tribulations sword?" Not waiting for anyone's answer, he began to give a cold and stern laugh, and said, "All right. I will let all of you take a look at the 9 tribulations sword." Suddenly, he gave an abrupt leap. He had already suffered countless fatal injuries, yet he actually leapt. In the middle of the air, blood from the wounds all over his entire body danced like a whirlwind and splattered about, but he was instead indifferent. With a grave facial expression, he gave a cold shout, 9 tribulations sword, a few rays of chilling light illuminates 10,000 zhang. The 9 tribulations sword waved. Like a bolt of unfurling white silk, a single ray of white light changed into an arc and shot out. Following behind the arc, 10 million rays of chilling light surged forth. Those 10 million rays of chilling light seemed to bring with them the heavens and earth's most ancient desolation. 9 tribulations sword. Sword techniques of the 9 heavens. The first sword, the 9 heavens, was the name of that continent. Since history, of all the sword techniques, none had ever dared to use those 3 words as its name. However, that 9 tribulations sword techniques instead, directly used the name, the 9 heavens. Throughout the ages, those sword techniques were the only set. Although Chu Yang could not exactly exert the true power of the 9 tribulations sword techniques, he had already perceived those few sword techniques for a very long time. The powers of those few sword techniques might not be as great as he had imagined, but they also exceeded all worldly sword techniques. The surrounding several tens of experts instinctively knew that sword technique was nothing trivial, and could not help but brought forth their treasured abilities, endeavoring to withstand against that single attack. The bodies of every single person shook, and they all felt that they could almost no longer hold on to their weapons steadily. Nine Tribulations sword, why not kill all under the heavens? The first stroke was unfinished, yet the second stroke had already descended murderously. The surging rays of light was like a rising tide of the sea, boundless killing intent spread across the skies and covered the earth, violently shooting out. Miserable screams rang out. 10 or so experts, who could each individually dominate an entire place, had all tried their utmost to resist, but instead still had their entire bodies splattered with blood, and awkwardly retreated. At that moment, every single person had a misconception. The Chu-yang of that moment was absolutely uninjured. He was definitely at his peak condition. They instead did not know that they had interrupted Chu-yang's memories and broken Mo Qing Wu's song and dance, making Chu-yang completely furious, thoroughly exerting forth his entire body's potential. That was the strength of life, wrath of the soul. That strength even exceeded when he was in his prime condition by far. Nine Tribulations sword, majesty is a single gathering of wind and clouds. Chu-yang wickedly gave a loud laugh. Amidst the waving movements of the Nine Tribulations sword, a huge majestic crown actually seemed to appear. Its magnificent sense of pressure spread across the skies and covered the earth. From the sword, wherever rays of light had pointed, miserable screams would be heard in succession, and arrows of blood flew. One by one, the heads of people tumbled down from their necks, as if a cart of rotten watermelons had been knocked over. With the descent of a conqueror, common people under the heavens will be slaughtered by me as I please. Following my whims, I take and destroy. Nine Tribulations sword. Sever the overwhelming emotions of the guest in the mortal world. Nine Tribulations sword. An everlasting fragrance from a mountain of corpses and sea of blood. With those three strokes in succession, the surface of the ground that had been dyed red with fresh blood once again became a slaughterhouse of an azura. Without any exception, all of those several tens of people who had surrounded and attacked, were completely lying within the pool of blood. Chu-yang staggered and fell. He arrogantly gazed at the surroundings with disdain. Looking at the several tens of zhang around him, there was already no one left standing. Those who were once experts, those who were once brilliant and glorious, before the Nine Tribulations sword's peerless powers under the heavens and earth, they had completely become numerous corpses on the ground. To think of wanting the Nine Tribulations sword. Are all of you even worthy? However, after that outburst, Chu-yang was also already, completely, close to death. Qing Wu, no matter if it is in the heavens or on the mortal realm, who can obstruct our meeting? Supported by his sword, he stood up and gasped for breath, while taking a short respite. His eyes were instead lightly closed. He was looking forward to once again seeing those songs and dance within his mind's consciousness. However, they were not there. Chu-yang suddenly opened his eyes, and gave a low growl. Why? Why are you not there? Qing Wu, afar, from three different directions, three rays of light soared at the same time, and took the form of three golden-colored silhouettes in the air. Magnificently dazzling, they carried with them a violent presence that was overwhelming, powerful and arrogant, phantoms of golden light, kings of their designated areas. Those three golden-colored silhouettes represented that three martial artist kings had made an appearance. Chu-yang's pupils shrunk, and he gave a bitter laugh while looking powerlessly at the three golden-colored silhouettes in the air, his heart completely as cold as ice. He had never thought that his opponent's true killing stroke would only come out until that very moment, that he was only a revered martial artist, and was only one level away from king rank. However, that one level was instead no different from the distance between the heavens and earth. 3 Martial artist kings, what a large involvement, what good swordsmanship, definitely worth of being the poisonous sword revered martial artist. However, this three higher heavens is instead not the place where you, a mere poisonous sword revered martial artist, can behave atrociously. One of the men said gently, "It is just a pity that I am unable to fight a fair battle with you. What a deep regret." Following that speech, the remaining two people appeared together. Those three people were all dressed in wide robes with large sleeves, those sleeves fluttering along with the wind. Their attitudes were elegant and smart, and their facial expressions were calm. Chu Yang's gaze was already a little blurred. "Three of you martial artist kings. Also think of wanting the 9 tribulations sword." "Wrong, we are not exactly thinking of wanting the 9 tribulations sword. Instead, we are thinking to let you die." Those three people gave a slight smile at the same time, their attitude serious. However, incidentally, taking the 9 tribulations sword can also be considered as an unexpected harvest. A large harvest. Chu Yang momentarily gave a cold and arrogant smile. He straightened his spine, and arrogantly said, "It is only a pity that all of you do not understand the 9 tribulations sword. All of you will never obtain it." His gaze changed and became decisive, absolute and natural. At that moment, he already did not have the strength for another battle, however, instead, he could still issue forth one final attack. Destroy himself, destroy the 9 tribulations sword. Destroy the enemies. The sword gave off a glint of light. Chu Yang had violently reversed the 9 tribulations sword, and violently thrust it into his own heart. With a pair of emotionless eyes looking at the three people in the air, he shouted, "With the blood of my heart, 10,000 tribulations will collapse. As master of the 9 tribulations sword, all opposites will transpose." That was the only sword technique which he was able to completely exert the full power of the sword. When he had initially seen the sword verse, he just knew that was the only one sword technique that he was able to perform. However, that kind of sword technique, instead required him to use his own life to initiate that kind of sword technique. Who would dare to use? When that sword technique was used, the person performing it would die. The 9 tribulations sword suddenly began to flare violently, and it was as if a sun had appeared in the middle of the air. Keen sword energy suddenly burst forth violently. That wild and fierce energy had actually launched Chu Yang's entire body into the middle of the air. That was the ultimate move of the 9 tribulations sword. To use the blood of his own heart and to sacrifice his soul, then excite the sword's soul. However, that was still the absolute move to perish together with the enemy. That one move was even capable of executing opponents that were a long stronger than him by a few levels. That was still the 9 tribulations sword soul independently killing people, destroying everything, back. Those three martial artist kings were extremely shocked, and they rapidly fled towards the outside. Compared to the calm expression that they had during the time when they had arrived, it was a huge difference. Those graceful, elegant and smart bearings had long since disappeared without leaving any trace. They had never expected that poisonous sword revered martial artist would actually be capable of stimulating that one move. Hong a brilliant and incandescent ray of light emanated from the sword, rose into the sky, reflecting throughout the entire sky and changing it into a silver-white color. Those three martial artist kings, as if they did not even have the time to take their stances, nor even the time to issue forth their miserable screams, were simply destroyed and turned into smoke and flying dust. Moreover, even the golden silhouettes that were formed from their king-ranked energies still remained flashing in the air. However, their lives had instead already become nothingness. That one attack from the 9 tribulations sword soul had, within the range of its energy, even directly destroyed the heavens and earth, not to mention only 3 martial artist kings. Chu Yang suddenly felt quite humorous, and unintentionally gave a bitter smile. Unless, the secret behind the invincibility of that 9 tribulations sword was that. Then, what value did the godly item that was ranked first on the continent still have? However, he vaguely felt that it should not be such. Yet, he already did not have the chance to unearth the true secret behind the 9 tribulations sword. Chu Yang gave an audible sigh. While his body was still in the middle of the air, his eyes momentarily skimmed at random, and instead discovered someone whom he believed should absolutely not have appeared there. From afar, a single man in white clothes was looking with astonishment at his direction, his face completely filled with disbelief. Tianxia. Chu Yang's gaze momentarily straightened, and he finally understood. Why was his secretive movements actually ambushed by people? Why was his every attack carefully intercepted by people? No wonder. It was him. God of the abacus and the ghost of calculations, Motianjit. Was no wonder that he had suffered such a crushing defeat. Chu Yang thought of giving a miserable laugh, thought of ridiculing himself, thought of. However, in the end, he did not do anything. He had already lost all of his strength, and he was also too late to consider. Chu Yang's body gradually dropped from the sky, gradually fell downwards, and like a drifting dead leaf during late autumn, fell onto the dirt. His face carried a faint but warm smile, and muttered, "Qing Wu, should there be another life, we will dance under the heavens." Since he could not avoid death, then with his greatest passion and deepest yearning, he would embrace death. That was because, over there, waited his beloved. From somewhere, snow fell and swirled from the wide skies, while the very earth was dressed and wrapped in silver. Seemingly on a boundless piece of ground covered with pure white snow, a graceful and red-colored figure began to dance lightly, as if welcoming him, and also as if she was anxious for Chu Yang. Her face could not be seen clearly, but that gently bound gaze which was free from regret and resentment, and filled with deep passion, was instead very clear. Those dance movements were graceful, becoming increasingly intense, and the highest level of the heavens and deepest recess of the earth continuously danced, but they were all actually melancholic and cold like fresh blood. Somewhere near Chu Yang's heart, the tip of the 9 tribulations sword suddenly gave off a dazzling radiance, and it was actually magnificently dazzling for people to behold. Chu Yang, with his eyes already closed, seemed to hear a fleeting voice from somewhere, carrying with it weariness and joy, as if it had weighted with a kind of heavy burden for thousands of years. In a low tone, it seemed to have said, "The 9 tribulations have become empty, life and death are still calm, the blue skies can still be mended, why should you look forward to a next life?" It finally came. Within that voice, those short 20.8 words actually seemed as if they had experienced countless drastic changes, as if those changes had always been kept beyond its reach. Then, from the location of his heart, a dazzling radiance shot out and rose from the ground. It flashed in the middle of the sky, suddenly scattering and creating glaring rainbows all over the skies, illuminating the entire heavens and earth together. People who saw that scene widened their eyes as if they were blind. However, with just that single flash, it directly soared towards the highest heaven, then instantly disappearing without a shadow or any trace. On the wind and thunder platform, the winds whimpered, as if weeping and complaining, as if they still repeated that one sentence which Chu Yang had said, "Should there be another life? Should there be another life? We will dance under the heavens." Rylane's translator notes. 1. Mo Qing Wu, her surname is Mo, pronounced something like Mu, or. Her name, Qing Wu, literally translates to gentle dance, and the poem she created has a wordplay related to her name. Listen to the full novel at FameTV.info, direct link in the description.